for people who are not as familiar, and because they tend to just observe, right, they would assume that, sometimes fighting games is more about, can be a bit more button mashy a bit, right, if you think about it. Is that actually the case? Like, is it true that in order for you to master fighting games, you just have to button mash your way around? Or does it actually take skill and technique and even memorization to actually be able to master fighting games properly?
Oh my, yes, and execution is very important if you want to be like in the top tiers of a fighting game tournament scene. See, if you button mash and you get hit while sticking out an attack, you get hit and be in a counter attack state, where your opponent will be at a huge advantage and do combos and big damage to you that they normally couldn't when they hit you normally. So yes, you can still play casually button mashing in Tekken 7, but if you do this online in a ranked match against a higher tier player, you'll either get parried heavily or just get countered and getting punished for pulling out all these unsafe attacks you'll be mashing out. The skills required to play really well are very numerous. You need to know your character's best normal moves, your best special moves that either start or end a combo string, like a combo where you do a bunch of attacks for big damage and then there's like a 5-hit or 6-hit combo, right? And your character's strength, and you also need to figure out your character's strengths and weaknesses. Because characters in fighting games, they're divided in different archetypes. Like you've got your all-rounder Shoto characters, who are characters with anti-air, a projectile move, and a horizontal distance covering move. You also got your rushdown characters, who are, like the speed demons. Your grapplers, they got huge hit points, they do big damage, but they're very slow. As well as zoners, who are basic characters who are weak from up close, but they do very well from far away, like Dhalsim in Street Fighter. You need to know the characters in the game you're playing in the roster and what they do, what their weaknesses and their strengths are, so that when you pick a character that you're used to, you get to navigate around the different matchups, whether you're good or bad at these things. You also need to understand the game's universal mechanics, like how the game handles overhead moves, where basically you have to block high from certain attacks. You have to figure out the game's combo system and how you actually gain meter, like resources, so that you can actually pull off game-changing moves on your end. You also need to learn like what combos to what moves do go to where, like how to cancel moves, where basically when you do one move, you can cancel it to either a special or normal move. You kind of need to understand how those game mechanics work, as well as your defensive options and a lot more, depending on the game you're playing and trying to master. So fighting games are like chess matches, except the chess pieces actually shoot out fireballs and do fancy moves that defy gravity.
I guess the fun is in executing all these moves, special moves and whatnot. But at the same time, it depends also on the kind of games on offer, right? And I think the most popular one is obviously Street Fighter, and
it's the most universally popular in pop culture. Yeah.
But there are also other franchises that are as popular as well, right? So maybe you can perhaps share the history of all these franchises. I think we've done Mortal Kombat before. I think we've spoken about Mortal Kombat before. But
yep, we have.
Yeah. Well, what about the other franchises that are, I guess, as important in elevating the fighting game scene?
I guess right now, within the past 10 years, we've got Street Fighter 4 that actually started the fighting game resurgence. You've got the King of Fighters series that's basically making sure that Capcom does a great job because it's competition. They've actually teamed up together in a fighting game called Capcom vs SNK and SNK vs Capcom back in the 2000 era. But SNK, they're now doing just fine with King of Fighters 14 and Samurai Showdown. And now they're gonna gear up for the release of King of Fighters 15, which is, I believe, coming out next year. That series is important, and so is the Guilty Gear series, which is basically catering towards the anime, combo-savvy, high-flying fighting game genre, with the latest game being Guilty Gear Strive, which is right now the most accessible Guilty Gear game that you can actually jump on board right now. Like, it's still really fresh, so that's the best fighting game you can jump on right now that's really new.
As with a lot of other games out there, other IPs out there, you also have people who eventually get deeper into the game's lore and stories, right? Not just playing the game for the sake of playing, right?
Yeah. People, that's also the great thing about fighting games. They have like an actual story that happens behind the scenes. When you finish the single player modes for Darkstalkers, Vampire Savior, Street Fighter, and even King of Fighters, that's actually a story that plays out when you play the canon team that you use, or the characters that who are the heroes of the stories. They got their own stories that happens at the end when you finish the game. So people don't play fighting games just for the mechanics, but they also play it because of the characters they love, the setting that they're in. Street Fighter is super popular because people can relate to a character like Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Guile, or even M. Bison, or all the different colorful cast of characters, like how they play, how they look, how they fight, and their personalities. I mean, personally, I do play Street Fighter V a lot because of the character named Birdie. He's like a big, fat, slovenly British guy with a cool mohawk, and he's got that chain moves and everything. And I like his fighting game movesets. And also, I do like characters like Laura. Like, she's actually a really cool Brazilian character who shoots lightning and does a little bit of a rushdown grapple playstyle. And of course, there's Chun-Li and Ken and Ryu. Like, even King of Fighters, you got like different characters like Kyo Kusanagi and Iori Yagami, whom my little sister also likes a lot too because of the way he looks. And he's got that cool, affable, also kind of like a bad boy personality going on, as well as all the other colorful characters like Ryo, Kim, Kapwan, and also Mai Shiranui and Yuri. There are too many characters and too many backstories. Like, it's just colorful. It's got that really colorful universe going on, and each of the characters are just designed in a very eccentric, out of this world yet grounded fashion, if that makes sense. So yeah, people do gravitate towards these fighting games because of the look, the graphics, the aesthetic, the art style, and the world that it's all set in. I think that's also why people love Guilty Gear a lot, especially Guilty Gear Strive, because it is beautiful to look at. I mean, yes, it's really fun to play too, but again, when you, from a spectator standpoint, you'd be like, wow, this is anime, it looks good, it's stylish, slick, and the music's also pretty awesome too if you're into rock and roll, you know.
But how did it come back then? Aside from the games that you mentioned that you credited, how did it become popular again?
I think it's, of course, apart from Street Fighter 4 actually bringing back 2D fighting games in a very nice 3D fashion. Like, it's 3D graphics, but it's still 2D fighting. I believe they also came back because of the community, who basically took a break from fighting games. They play a little bit here and there, and then when they see Street Fighter 4 back and being popularized by Capcom and in pop culture, this was something they want to jump on board because they're experts in the field. So, like I mentioned before, I did help the Singapore tournament organizers a little bit back then before they took things to their own accord and stride and their own way of doing things. And yeah, it actually grew to something healthy right now. I actually attribute all this to the community, who actually did a great job in keeping the spirit of fighting games alive from 2008 till now. Like, in Malaysia, I believe it's still going on right now as we speak, because you've got Infinite Carnage, who are basically, they're active since when Marvel vs. Capcom 3 came out. Like, I believe that was around 2010-11, and up till now they've been basically hosting different tournaments and matches. They're part of the Vortex Gallery fighting game online tournament in September, and they're going to be hosting and arranging the Mobile Suit Gundam Extreme vs. Maxi Boost On fighting game tournament in September. And yeah, I know, Gundam has a fighting game. Who knew, right? And also, because of the top players who are basically doing their best to be like the best they are in competing, that also helps in, you know, keeping the fighting game communities alive and kicking in different regions in Asia especially. So yeah, Southeast Asia itself has many top players. I mean, there are a lot, but off the top of my head, there's like Book, who is a really pro player in Tekken 7 from Thailand. There's AK and Jules for Philippines for Tekken 7. Zien from Singapore, he's really good at Street Fighter 5 and Street Fighter 4 back in the day, and as well as King of Fighters. I Am Chuan is also like top Malaysian player for Street Fighter 5. Also DER Fierce, he's also one of the top players for Guilty Gear and Guilty Gear Strive. As well as SEO, who's a very top player from Singapore, who's also really good with Anime Fighters and Guilty Gear Strive. Those are the top players I know on the top of my head, who are basically helping out their respective communities, but also doing their best to be the best in, you know, fighting game Asia history and, you know, rising the ranks and whatnot. Fighting games are still going to be around for a very long time because people still want to watch that competitive spirit tournament that goes on, because watching a fighting game tournament with the commentators who know what they're talking about, that is a really great experience so that you know what's going on. But even if you're there to see the colorful action going on, that's still fun in its own right, which is why aesthetics in fighting games are very, very important. Just as important as the mechanics in the fighting game. Like, matches go by really fast and they can get really technical. You need a fighting game that can impress both people from a casual and competitive standpoint. Like, people watch football games because you got casuals and experts watching it and enjoying it all the same, right? And they can boo and cheer at different things that happen, whether they're good or bad, right? So the same can be applied to fighting games. Like, you want it to look really good, you want it to also play really well, so that both the casuals and competitive players can watch and have fun.